Snow's come and gone, just as life each day comes and goes. There's always a beauty with the snow, and there's always beauty after the snow's gone. The water has replenished the earth. So much to be thankful for. And as we look at our lesson today, we're going to see a lot over the next few lessons that can be disturbing. But, it's just like Friday night. We were disturbed, we were scared, we were worried that the snow, the ice, is going to take the electricity out, things of that nature. But what we'll learn in our lessons for the next few Sundays is, as much as we see the bad, God always provides the good. And we see that in His Scripture. Now in Daniel chapter 7, we are going to see the first of 4 prophetic dreams that Daniel will have. Now this dream is going to include beasts, and these beasts are going to represent kings, and the horns are going to represent rulers. Try to keep that in mind, because the beast representing kings is the past. The horns representing the rulers is the future. And what Daniel is going to see here is the future. What we're going to see also is that Christ is going to destroy all human kingdoms, and He's going to replace it with His own perfect kingdom in the end, the millennial reign. And all of us at some point in time have wished we knew the future. How many times have you, over the course of your life, just wished you knew what the future was? Well, we do. We know what the future is. So many times, I'd love to know what my job's going to entail of me 20 years from now. Those kind of things is human nature to wonder what's going to happen. But what we're going to see here in Daniel is what is going to happen with the devil and with the saints of God. Now, think about this. Knowing the future is not really all it's cracked up to be. And when you ask yourself whether you want to know the future, do you really want to know it? Can you handle it? Because if you really knew the future, you wouldn't be able to. Think of it this way. As of today, we can take a little bit of your saliva, we can give it to a DNA expert, and he can tell you pretty much what kind of diseases that you will be prone to have. Not tell you exactly, but he can tell you what your body makeup, what kind of diseases you'll have. He can tell you what kind of medications you pretty much can take and what you can't take based on your body makeup. He can even tell you what your ancestors are. He can basically tell you a little bit of the future. Now, will it happen? He can tell you what kind of diseases, but he can't tell you if a particular disease will affect you. But it's possible. Well, what we see here in Daniel is not what's possible. It is what will happen. In studying this, my burden in giving these lessons, these next few lessons, is these lessons can get very deep. Very deep. If you get into the Matthew Henry Study Bible and look at the in-depthness, the pages upon pages of information about each chapter here, it can blow your mind. So my burden is to make sure I condense it down. And I'm hoping and praying that I can give it to you in a way that is understanding, that is simple. And then if you want to go a little bit further, then you can get out your commentaries. Study it even a little bit more, because it's so amazing how each of these words in the dreams is very important about our future. Now, would you want to know every disease your body can possibly get? There's a good answer. It would scare you to death. Not even sick yet, but just knowing you'd be the sickest person in the world because you'd be so scared to death of what would happen. I could get cancer, I could get Alzheimer's, I could get this, I could get that. Then you become unproductive because you're so worried. Seventh chapter. Yes, ma'am. But what we're going to see here is Daniel has done the DNA test, and he knows exactly what is getting ready to happen. He sees these visions. The visions aren't what's going to happen, it's what will happen. We also see that Daniel gets very troubled by these dreams. That's what I was saying a second ago. If you know the future, if you're not careful, you can become very unproductive because you're so scared, you're so worried. Apostle Paul said in 2 Timothy 3, verse 1, that in the last days perilous times will come. They're coming. What's not already started? They're coming. Now let me ask you something. Are you fearful of the days of which we live in? I think we're all scared of what's going on today. And with that answer, let me ask you this. Have you learned how to use God's Word to calm your fears? It's like I said a few minutes ago. This chapter is giving us a dream that is very horrific. All these dreams are going to focus on something very bad. But also in these chapters is words of wisdom, words of comfort. And so many times we look at what is so bad going on around us that we don't look at what God has promised us. Our lesson today in Daniel is going to focus on the second half of the book of Daniel. Now, the first half of the book of Daniel focused on history, and it focused on the dealings that Daniel had to deal with. That's all it was. The second half focuses on his dreams, what the future is, and what our future is. Now, one thing I want you to take notice about, chapter 7 through chapter 12, the last chapter of Daniel, all fit chronologically within the first 6 chapters of Daniel. Chapter 7 and 8 fits between chapters 4 and 5, because we'll know that from the introduction of this chapter. Chapter 9 is going to fit before chapter 6. Chapters 10 through 12 are going to fit after chapter 6. Because in chapters 4 through 5 on this one, it talks about Belshazzar again. Then chapter 9, which is before chapter 6, is during the time of Darius. And then 10 through 12 is during the time through King Cyrus. So all this fits together and happened, even though we didn't go over it in the first 6 chapters. Everything now happened within the first 6 chapters. So as we look at our lesson today in Daniel, in verses 1 through 14, we see Daniel receiving his vision. Now we see here that what God did with Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. He first gave the revelation. He first gives the dream. Then he gives the desire to understand it. Because we'll see that here with Daniel in his dream. He has a dream and he desires to understand it, just as Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar did. They dreamed, they desired, then it was interpreted. The same will happen here with Daniel. Now in the first 3 verses we see the setting of this vision. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night And behold, the four winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea, which is the Mediterranean Sea. And four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. Now these four beasts are four kings. Now even though it's not stated here, it was God's purpose to assure Daniel that even though a new king, because like I said, this was the first year of Belshazzar, it says in the first verse. So Daniel has already been subdued. He's been pushed back. We know that Belshazzar did not want him around. So he's discouraged, I'm sure. Think of it today. Look at our president, our leader, how discouraged it can make us. But what these verses are saying is God, it's not said here, but God is letting Daniel know that no matter what is going on, God's will provide, and it will happen. God's eternal plan is not going to be changed. Now, the other thing we need to understand in this passage of chapter is that the pagan kings always saw the Gentile kingdoms from a man's point of view. They looked at it as spectacular and grand. Just think of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. He saw that statue as spectacular and grand. But what we're going to see here is Daniel sees the Gentile history of God's point of view, which is something beastly, and it's something very crude that is going to happen. There's no easy way to put this, and there's no words to try to make it sound nice. It's going to be bad. And that's what he's showing him here. But he's also showing him Belshazzar won't reign forever. God's final kingdom is coming. No matter what, you can always look for that. The introduction here also says that the winds, in verse 2, that is a symbolization of God's intervention. God is coming. Also in verse 2 it says, talks about the seas. That is symbolic to humanity. And it talks about in verse 3 that the four beasts are symbolic of the four kingdoms that are getting ready to come into power during Daniel's time, and the four kingdoms that will come into power during our time. Now in verses 4 through 14 we see the scene with the vision. And let me remind you that each of these beasts refer to a kingdom during Daniel's time, but it also refers and represents a kingdom during our time. As I give you each beast and how it relates to Daniel's time, I will also give you the present day, one that corresponds with it. In verse 4 it says, the first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given it. Now this winged lion represents Babylon. That was their symbol, was a winged lion. That's representing the king of beasts and the king of the birds. It's very powerful. But the plucking of the wings that we see in verse 4 also refers to Nebuchadnezzar, because it refers to Babylon, so it refers to Nebuchadnezzar. And most likely, the plucking of the wings refers to when he went insane, the 7 years that he was insane. Standing on the feet and giving of the man's heart represents pretty much when Nebuchadnezzar had his spiritual conversion. It also represents to the time that he started treating his people more humanely as a man. Now, in the present, this winged lion represents the Anglo-American. The British, which are the lions, and America, which is the eagles. Verse 5, we see the next beast. It's the bear. And behold, another beast, a second, like to the bear. And it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, arise, devour much flesh. This bear represents the Medo-Persians. If you remember our past lessons, I'm sort of just reviewing, because we had the winged lion, which is the Babylonian Empire. Now we have the bear, which is the Medo-Persians. It speaks of him rising up on one side, which refers to Persia, which was more stronger than the Medes. So they arose higher. It also speaks of 3 ribs in between its teeth. Now these 3 ribs at their time referred to Lydia, Egypt, and Babylon, because those are the 3 main countries that they overtook during that time. Now, it also talks about devouring of the flesh, which talks about the amount of aggression and the way they expanded when they took over all these different countries. So if you look at today's time period, the bear would refer to Russia. Okay? And the 3 ribs that are in Russia's mouth would refer to Latria, Lithuania, and Estonia during the present time. We also talked about devour the flesh, meaning aggression. Look at Russia's aggression towards Crimea and towards Ukraine. They're trying to expand. They're being very aggressive, and they're very strong. A bear is very strong. A lion moves quickly and fiercely. A bear moves slowly and fierce, even more fierce than a lion, because he just takes his time, he's preserving his energy, and then he lets you have it all. That's what Russia's doing. Now in verse 6, the third beast, after this I beheld, and lo, another, like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given it. Now this beast, the leopard, refers to Greece. The leopard has very notable speed and very agile. I mean, they can twist and turn on a dime. They're so fast, but they can turn on a dime. Greece during this time was just as fearful and just as quick. Alexander the Great, who was in charge of Greece at the time, his army overtook over 11,000 square miles of territory within 8 years. No army from that time period has ever moved that fast before. He went from Egypt to Greece. He even went all the way into India. He moved just like a leopard, so it refers to Greece. Now, the 4 heads that's referred to in this verse refers to the fact that after Alexander the Great died, his kingdom, the Grecian kingdom, was separated into 4 kingdoms with his top 4 generals. Now, if we look at the relationship today, this leopard refers to the east. Now, the east would be, and the 4 heads of the east would be China, Japan, India, and Indochina. Now, all these places I've mentioned, I'm going to bring them back into perspective in just a little bit. But everything is referring to the present from the past, and it is equaling something in the present. In verse 7, we see the next beast, and it's a beast like no particular animal. After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Now this beast is given, we don't have an image of actually what this beast is. We know what a lion and a bear and a leopard look like, but this one, it's not given any particular animal, but it's a beast. Now this animal here represents Rome, the Rome of the past, but it also represents the Rome of the future. Rome will be revived again during the tribulation time period. All the others, Greece, Medo-Persians, the Babylonians, they all came and went, never to come into major power again. But Rome will come into power again. Now in verse 8, we're going to see this beast in two forms. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were three of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. Now first we see here the 10 horns. Then we see the little horn. And the little horn comes in and uproots 3 of the 10 horns. So what he's done here is we've got 10 kingdoms, 10 rulers, and then in comes this little horn, and he uproots 3 of them. That leaves 7. Now these 10 horns also refer to the 10 toes that were mentioned in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Remember 10 toes? We said that was in the future when we went over that in our lesson, that was down the road. This is referencing those 10 toes that were on that statue. Now the revived Roman Empire will have an alliance of 10 kingdoms. It's going to come in existence during the tribulation. Now the European Empire, we are so fearful nowadays of the EU, as they put it. But the EU has close to 30 members. We know that there's only going to be 10. Now, I'm not saying that the EU couldn't eventually... No, the EU won't be the revived Roman Empire. They got too many members. But they could bring in the Roman Empire, which would eliminate their 30 countries. 10 countries would be raised as rulers, just as we see here, the 10 horns, which would be after we're raptured, tribulation beginning. And then the one little horn, who do you think that is? It's the Antichrist. And this is when he comes into power. He's going to overthrow the kings, the 3 of the kings. He's going to control the last 7. In verse 8, it says the eyes and mouth, which is mentioned here. That tells you that that little horn is a human, because it has eyes and mouth. It has the unusual ability, and it's filled with pride and arrogance. We already know that the Antichrist is going to be prideful and arrogant. He's going to think he's God. He's going to even tell everybody he's God. Now, up until now, Daniel has observed the beast. But in verse 9, we see a change. We see him looking before verse 9 at the beast. Now we see a court appearance here. This is basically a courtroom scene that we're going to start seeing in verse 9. And I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as a burning fire. Now this statement here, thrones that were cast down, basically means they were placed that way. In other words, God took them down. He placed them down. And the judgment that we see here in verse 9 is going to be handed down at the end of the tribulation. And it's going to be right before the millennial kingdom is set up. Now the words here, Ancient of Days. Does anybody have a clue what that means? Anybody have a clue? That's right. Ancient, if you notice here, is capitalized. That is speaking of God. So anytime you see that term, Ancient of Days, it sort of makes me feel good. Because that means God's coming in. God's present. We also see that his throne, referred here, is mentioned by the fire. And that the wheels that are mentioned here also refers to the universal scope of his judgment. If you remember back in Daniel 2, the mountain that was raised, do you remember that? What did it say? over the whole world. Same here. The wheels talks about the justice and the judgment that will be given to the Antichrist, the devil, and all of his demons. Everyone that has fought with him, will fight with him, will be dealt with and will be judged. God promises that. The book also mentioned here in verse 10. Well, let me back up. Verse 10 through 12, we're going to see that he has people beyond numbers to help him. And I'm talking about the Lord. I'm not talking about the devil, but I'm talking about the Lord. In verse 10 it says, a fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. I beheld then, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake, I beheld even till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed, and given to the burning flame. As coming the rest of the beast, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and time. We see that judgment is given. It talks about the little horn. God judges him. God takes care of him. The book referred to here also refers to that God keeping up with the works that are performed by the sinners. Look at Revelation 20, verse 12 real quick. 20 verse 12 says, and I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to their works. On his throne, God is going to judge all these beasts. In verse 11, we see that the beast is slain and his body is burned. In Revelation 19, verses 12 through 21, it tells us that the armies of the beast are destroyed by death, but that the beast and his prophet are cast alive into the lake of fire. In verse 13, it says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him, like the Son of Man. Now that refers to Christ approaching God, which refers to his second coming or advent during after the tribulation. In verse 14 it says, and there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. This is going to be a literal kingdom that God is going to set up after the tribulation. This is the millennial time that he's talking about here. This is when Christ comes and rules and sets up his throne in the millennial kingdom. Now in verse 15, starting in verse 15, we're going to see Daniel is very troubled because he's trying to understand what this dream means. The first 14 verses is the dream itself. Now is his desire to understand it, and it's the interpretation of the dream. We see here in verse 15 and 16, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit in the midst of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. And I came near unto one of them that stood by, and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made me know the interpretation of things. Now what we see here is that Daniel approaches an angel. It gives more, angels are put in place to minister unto us. Okay? That's God's promise. It gives a new meaning to the word guardian angel. And I tend to believe that when you become saved, you get assigned an angel. And he's there to help you, to be with you, and even when you're in trouble, to give you comfort. So there's a new meaning to the word guardian angel when you think about it. In verses 17 and 18, we see two things. In verse 17, we see that there are four beasts, and that they are the four kings. We also see in verse 18 that the saints of God, which is you and I, are going to one day have active roles and positions within the millennial kingdom, and we will reign serving our God for all eternity. In verse 19, Daniel finally understands the meaning of the fourth beast. Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, and his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. What we're going to see here in these few verses is Daniel is mulling over that dream. The angels already helped him interpret it, so now he's mulling it over. Verses 20 through 22, he was reviewing the description of that beast, what that fourth beast is going to do, and the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the others which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth, and that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. And I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints, and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given. God will judge him. That's why he's reviewing this. He's so distraught with what he's seeing. He wants to be sure in his mind he understands it. But he also is reminded by the angel, the Ancient of Days will come. In verse 23, we see Rome's mentioned again. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, which is Babylon, Medo-Persians, and Greece. They came, they went, they never came back into power again. But Rome, it did go into power. It came into power in 2 AD, before Christ, and lasted well into 500 BC. So it was one of the longest reigning anyway. But we also know with the feet of that statue that they will come back into power. But then in verse 24, we see that the 10 horns is the 10 kingdoms. We see the 11th horn that comes up, the small horn, is the Antichrist. We see that he destroys the 3 kings and that he controls the last 7. Now, I told you earlier, the last 7 kingdoms. What could they possibly be? Well, I've already given them to you. Britain, United States, Russia, China, Japan, Indochina, India. Those are the 7 possible world powers that will be left. Now, what 10 comes up and what 3 get destroyed, I don't even want to speculate because I don't know. But if you think about how these horns refer from the past to the future, those 7 countries could very much be in power during this time. In verse 27, it pretty much closes that we see the saints of God prevail. In verse 27, and the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Now we know that the 3.5 years is there.